Hey there, welcome to episode 116 of the Social Business Engine podcast, the podcast where I invite thought leaders from all industries to share their expertise on social and digital communications best practices. I'm Bernie Borges from Find and Convert and your host of the Social Business Engine podcast. On this episode, you are going to meet Nick Weber, Global Social Media Strategy Lead at Monsanto Company. Nick will explain how Monsanto is empowering customers and employees to advocate for the brand. This episode is sponsored by Outward Media Inc., a leader in the direct marketing industry. Later in the show, I'll tell you about a valuable offer from Outward Media. And now, here's my interview with Nick Weber, Global Social Media Strategy Lead at Monsanto Company. Nick, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Hey, thanks, Bernie. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So am I. Well, Nick, let's begin with, Monsanto is a brand that's been around for quite a while. And I know a little bit about some of the recent changes that you were sharing with me before we started recording. Why don't you give us an update, give our listeners an update on who Monsanto is today?
Sure, Bernie. So technically, Monsanto is about a 13-year-old company. The name Monsanto has been around since 1901. It originally was founded as a chemical company. It produced saccharin back in 1901 by John Queeny here in St. Louis. Over time, it sort of reinvented itself through scientific innovations, got into the pharmaceutical business, got into agriculture. Lots of things happened over the first 90 years of the old Monsanto, that's how we refer to it here. Mm-hmm. And then in the 2000s, there were some mergers in the pharmaceutical space. You can find some of that stuff on our website, Monsanto.com, in the Who We Are section. To go into a little bit more detail, but long story short, in 2003, one of the pharmaceutical companies that the old Monsanto was purchased by sort of spun off the agricultural unit of its company, and Monsanto basically kept that old name for Monsanto Company. And now we're a company that's 100% committed to agriculture. So we provide seeds for farmers, corn, soybean, cotton, lots of other crops, vegetable crops, also some herbicides for farmers that use on their crops. We're also getting into the data space. So we have a climate corporation company that helps farmers use apps on their phones and iPads and get really prescriptive about how much fertilizer they might need on an acre of corn. Or there's a weather app that's part of that that gives them a better idea of like, hey, should I plant today or not? Now, most of you probably are listening and saying like, oh, look outside. But as we all know, weather can change in a heartbeat. So there's some weather-based information out there. So it's really kind of continues to reinvent itself as a company and really try to find ways to help farmers basically help them feed a growing population that's going to hit 9+ billion people here in the next 30+ years. So it's an exciting time to be in agriculture, and it's a great company to work for.
Awesome. Well, that's a great recap. And as you pointed out, there's a lot of history there that I think a lot of us, including myself, we're not familiar with. So thank you for that, Nick. So the way that we were introduced was from the Social Media Strategy Summit, specifically the Chicago location. And you spoke at that event. And one of the things that you said in your presentation was how that the landscape in 2008 and 2009 really kind of motivated Monsanto to adopt social media. So can you elaborate on what you mean by that and maybe just provide a little overview on that?
Sure. So back in, like I said, Monsanto started about 2003. So if you look back at 2008, the company was really only about 5 or 6 years old. And farmers were, doing their thing, growing crops. Monsanto was doing their thing, providing the farm inputs, the seeds and the chemicals and things like that. But in 2008, I think we kind of saw a change, sort of a shift in the conversation throughout. People started caring and talking more about their food, and that's a good thing. We want to be part of those conversations at Monsanto. But in 2008, we probably were, I'd say, maybe caught a little flat-footed if you look back at that time. So a few things that popped out at that time was an article in Vanity Fair called "The Harvest of Fear." it was a big old feature story on Monsanto and our business practices. And one of the things some of the people might be familiar with is Monsanto has these seeds and traits that are patented seeds. And a lot of people will say, well, why are you patenting seeds? Shouldn't farmers and gardeners be allowed to save their seeds to plant for next year? That was an age-old practice that pretty much had stopped in agriculture, 60, 70 years ago. It's still practiced in some areas, and that still happens, and that's a business model some people choose to do. But Monsanto, because of some of our technologies like herbicide tolerance or insecticide tolerance to certain bugs in the field for cotton, corn, soybeans, those types of things, we patent a lot of our products, much like Apple has a patent on the iPhone, right? So we charge farmers a premium for some of those products. Well, sometimes farmers violate the agreements that we have with them, and there are certain cases, I think there have been 10 or 11 to date, where we have sued some farmer customers. And this article in Vanity Fair went into great detail on that and was erroneous in some parts. So that article was getting shared all over the internet. And if you search Monsanto on Google, and you haven't before, it's probably going to pop up in one of the top 10 searches, if I had to guess. So at that time, that was kind of a shock to the system. Like, oh wow, we didn't engage with that media outlet, or we weren't out there telling our side of the story.
So you weren't ahead of it. You were kind of caught. Like you even said, caught a little flat-footed. So, I mean, was that kind of a wake-up call for you guys?
Yeah, there's two other things that happened. I want to kind of touch on that kind of was that wake-up call. And the other thing was two things. One, Michael Pollan, who some people are very familiar with, is a writer and kind of an authoritarian in some circles on food and what people should eat. And he had a book come out called In Defense of Food, An Eater's Manifesto, and that talked a lot about the food system and how people can change their diets and change the food system by the way they eat. I think I honestly have not read the book, but I've heard the Cliff Notes versions from people I work with. But that also was an article that was being shared widely on blogs and social media at that time. And there was no sort of counter to Michael Pollan, I think. The other thing that came out was Food Inc., a documentary that was actually nominated for an Academy Award. And we're featured in that along with a few other agribusinesses. That kind of takes a look at agriculture and what they kind of say is pulling the veil back on agriculture. Again, agriculture wasn't out there telling its story in a great way. And those three things I just mentioned were kind of the media, the social media driven type things that were happening that kind of caused agriculture in Monsanto to be like, what's going on here? Wow, we need to be in social media. And so you look at all those three things and you look at, at that time in 2008, Facebook was still 4 or 5 years old. YouTube was only a couple years old. Twitter had just started and getting adopted. So all these people had these great forums to talk about stuff. Traditionally, as you know, Bernie, we relied on mainstream media up until the early 2000s for a lot of our stories. But now we have this proliferation of blogs and social media that came out, and people had these passionate things to say about agriculture and food, and they were really searching the terms of like, how is my food grown? Who grows it? Why? What is the difference between what is a genetically modified crop? What is an organic? What's organic mean? Those are good things to search for, but it was kind of a one-sided story in our view. So that's when back in 2008 and 2009, we kind of were like, wow, we really need to be out here. And get out there a lot more often.
Okay, so then maybe you can then start to take us through, Nick, what was the process that you went through to essentially develop your social strategy?
So broadly, back in 2008 and 2009, it was just get on the platforms, I think, and get out there and start responding to people who are characterizing our company and our brand incorrectly. And one thing that kind of got it going too was, when you list back through those events that I discussed, a lot of our farmer customers were kind of threatened by what was taking place. It was like, wow, these people have no idea what it takes to grow the food that goes to your plate, right? So if you think about it, Bernie, there are 320 million people in the United States. There are 2 million farmers. That is that's like 2% of the population that actually provides the food for the rest of us.
Wow.
I mean, that's amazing when you sit down and think about it, right?
Yeah.
So farmers are out there thinking, hey, I've been doing this for so long, no one's been no one's been asking me how I do stuff, and now all of a sudden you care. And when you care, you seem to get some of this information wrong. I don't have the, farmers are out there working 16-hour days. They're starting to get on the social media. They felt like, hey, how can I defend myself? What do I need to do? And that's where I think Monsanto sort of stepped in with a program that we were calling America's Farmers, that really wanted to share the story of America's farmers. Here are the people who grow your food. Here's what agriculture looks like. It's not the bucolic scene that we like to romanticize about with, the American Gothic and the guy with the pitchfork, right? It's a lot more technologically savvy than that, right? And so we wanted to talk about agriculture in a unique, engaging way, and that's where the America's Farmers program came through that we kicked off back in, I think, 2009 on it. So it was really to tell their story in a humanizing way, to say, hey, look, here's
So yeah, tell us about that, because I know that's the background that you've given, I think really is terrific for my listeners to really have that full context of the why of this program, the America's Farmers. So can you now sort of pull back the curtain, Nick, and tell us about the program? What's it comprised of? How does it engage? Just give us some real meat on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the America's Farmers program started back in, I think, 2008, 2009 or 2010, sometime in that time frame. I can't remember exactly. I apologize. Okay. But the goal of it was really an awareness type campaign, if we think about it that way. It was let's the consumers in the urban areas and suburban areas more aware about the people who grow the food that ends up on our plates. And so that was sort of the initial, I think, goal of it, was to get that awareness out there and have some brand recognition with Monsanto, I think. And farmers were really appreciative of it, I think. They were like, finally, a brand is stepping up for what we do. Now, agriculture was sort of a niche community, I think, in some of that regards, but now we were kind of stepping out and trying to reach those urban and suburban audiences who most of those people, like the Michael Pollins of the world and the Food Incs that were out there, they're the ones that were publishing and had the avenues to publish that. Now we're trying to play catch up a little bit, quite honestly, I think. But we were able to do that. The next step that sort of reiterated the program, the program sort of evolved to say, what else can we do? And so we set up a couple things that, again, wanted to reach out to the farmer customers and empower them in their own community. So one of the first things that they did, the folks who ran the program, was called America's Farmers Grow Communities. And so, again, if you kind of think back to what's a rural community look like as you maybe drive through it, in travels across America, there's volunteer fire departments. The rural school districts need a lot of support and help. And so one thing, that was what farmers were telling us, was, our communities could use a little boost here and there. And so one thing we did was set up a program where farmers can nominate any nonprofit in their community to receive a $2,500 check from Monsanto as part of the America's Farmers Fund. So all throughout these counties and in the rural areas, farmers were perceived as the hero, right? They're delivering the $2,500 check to the volunteer fire department who needs new hoses or needs new equipment to make sure that they're taken care of in their community. So it was really getting the farmer as the hero in this, and that was really, really helpful in terms of getting them embedded in their communities and saying wow, farmers need to stand up for themselves. They also need to contribute to their communities, and we're happy to see Monsanto being part of that process too. Right. A couple other programs that jumped out real quickly. America's Farmers Grow Rural Education. I mentioned the education aspect earlier. That gives grants out to schools who are looking to implement STEM programs, or how can they get ag programs up and running in their communities. And the other thing we did was America's Farmers Grow Ag Leaders. Again, what's the next generation of ag leadership look like in America? And so getting those people up and running in high school and earlier on to say, here's what you need to do to become a leader in our industry. So it was a multifaceted program that is really generating goodwill with the farmer, and in turn letting them go out and speak on their behalf for themselves. So again, there wasn't that. If we kind of bring this full circle, farmers were they had avenues to do it. Now we've given them a couple more avenues to get their messages out. Okay,
terrific. All right, so where I want to go next is I want to start talking about the content that you and your team have implemented in this program. But first, I want to pause for a message from our sponsor. Outward Media, Inc. is a leader in the direct marketing industry, providing businesses access to the largest SMB email database for the acquisition of new customers. OMI has a commitment to data accuracy that I find very impressive because it helps you identify your best prospects so that you can generate more qualified leads. In fact, OMI offers a 95% accuracy guarantee on all email data for 30 days. I urge you to download OMI's ebook, The Executive's 15-Minute Guide to Building a Successful Email Marketing Database, to discover the essentials for improving email deliverability. Now, when I read this ebook, I discovered at least 3 things that we needed to address. It's really a must-read for all digital marketers. You can get your copy now at outwardmedia.com/SBE, and you can also find the link to this ebook at our website at socialbusinessengine.com. Okay, Nick, so I know that you guys have developed this integrated digital newsroom, and so I'd like you to talk about that and the role that it's played in this program.
Yeah, so there's 2 different things that are kind of going on here, Bernie, and the America's Farmers was sort of the first iteration of telling our story more often, right? So we want to advocate for our customers, but when we did that, we found out that our customers are our biggest advocates. So we kind of adapted the America's Farmers program too to be a little bit more about social sharing. So we created a lot of content that was focused on the farmer as the hero again. We talked about that a little bit earlier. How do we make the farmer the hero? Well, we want to help them share content that's interesting and engaging, that gets them connected. While they're still living on a farm in central Illinois, they still have friends who live in Chicago and St. Louis or Des Moines, and urban friends and suburban friends. So, on Facebook and Twitter and those avenues, how do we empower them to share interesting and relevant information about what they do that reaches their urban and suburban audiences? So that was when we kind of did a couple things like, the original, we did a Facebook post on Earth Day. Most brands try to latch onto these days. Monsanto isn't immune to doing some of those things sometimes, but our America's Farmers campaign was a little bit separate, and it said we had posted a picture of a farmer in a cotton field with his son and said the original environmentalist, the American farmer. And you talk about the message being, they've reduced pesticide use and they've helped lower greenhouse gas emissions. And that really resonates with a farmer to say, like, heck yeah, I am an environmentalist. I do care about the land. I'm not out there dumping a bunch of chemicals, and I'm not out there doing bad things to the land. But the people in the city feel like they think that I do. How do I share that message to them? And that was a great message for these folks to share. So it ended up getting like 5,200 likes and 2,000 shares, which was one of the best performing posts we'd ever done. So again, we made social sharing that goal for the farmer audiences to do that. Now, I'm going to go a little bit here in terms of that was sort of like, let's get our customers on our side and help them become advocates for our brand.
Customers meaning your farmers. Those are your customers.
Our farmer customers. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're business to business. In our mind, we're a business to business. Our customers are farmers.
Right.
Farmers are the ones who grow the crops. They grow our seed. That's who we actually do transactions with.
Right.
But there's this whole component of you still have to. There's those conversations I alluded to with Food Inc. and Michael Pollan. There's still that consumer element of like, what is a GMO? Is organic better? How can I trust Monsanto when they sue farmers and I hear stories that they're killing all the bees? Well, that's when we sort of had a second shift in our program. We're like, look, we've helped our farmers and we've helped empower them and we've made them some of our brand advocates, but we need to also get consumers aware of our company. And so that was sort of the second iteration of our social strategy, which is improving the reputation of Monsanto with consumers out there. And so that's where we kind of had the shift of, we need to reach society and tell the story of modern ag better, tell the story of modern ag and Monsanto better to those consumer audiences. And that started about 18 to 24 months ago with a strategy to say, look, we need to build our story. Right. We were doing a great job talking to farmers, but we didn't do a great job probably in talking about GMOs. It's the consumer audiences, the only.
So Nick, what is a GMO for my listeners?
So Bernie, a GMO is a plant that's developed through a process where scientists and labs here at Monsanto and other companies look for a copy of a desired gene, such as herbicide tolerance or drought resistance, and take that from a different organism or plant and put it in another plant, such as corn or soybeans. So it's a scientific process that is helpful and delivers benefits to farmers.
Okay, thank you. All right, so then the storytelling then is at two levels. Then it's addressing both the customers and the consumer. People like you and me who buy food every day, except you work for Monsanto, so you're highly educated. But the rest of the world, if I understand correctly, you want to really educate on modern agriculture, how it's done, and then the role that Monsanto plays in contributing to quality food that hits our table.
That's right. And so we kind of felt there was a little bit of a gap in us in Monsanto telling our story to consumers about what do you need to know about GMOs? What should consumers know about GMOs? There's some misinformation about there, not just about GMOs, but about modern plant breeding and like how farmers go about and plant their crops and harvest their crops and what goes into everything behind that and how farmers are sustainable. And so I rattled off a lot of things there, but it was one of those things from, again, as an employee at Monsanto, I do live and breathe and hear about it, 40 plus hours a week, 5 days a week. And so when you see some of these stories out there, you're like, wow, this is like this is so off base, or this is misinformation.
It's got to be frustrating too.
It can be incredibly frustrating, especially in the social space where there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so, I live and breathe it, and you're like, wow, we've got so much work ahead to do, but we need to do it, right? You need to tell your story. I mean, that's been a thing that's been going on in brands in social media for the last 5+ years, right? Content marketing and content development and storytelling. We're in that same camp. We need to do a better job of telling our stories to consumers. So Nick, that's where this endeavor started.
On that point, are you producing all of this content yourself, you and your team, or do you repurpose content? Are you listening actively for other articles and then either engaging and commenting or repurposing? Why don't you talk a little bit about like your content strategy?
Yeah, it's all the above there.
All the above.
So we have a social listening function at Monsanto that's out there monitoring conversations, not just on our Facebook page, but sometimes other Facebook pages, both for people who might be pro-science. So there's various individuals who like to advocate that say genetically modified foods are okay. We're out there looking on their Facebook pages. What are people talking about right now? But we also look at some of the detractors who like to say, like, look, organic is the best way to go and you should avoid genetically modified food at all costs. So we need to know what those people are talking about so we can also think through, like, what pieces of content do we need to do that fill that gap, right? If they're spreading misinformation, how do you tell that story in a different way that you can maybe either self-promote yourself, or self-promote your own content that sort of answers some of those questions, or if you want to be really aggressive, develop a piece of content and respond directly to a post on a detractor's Facebook page. That's usually doesn't happen for us, but sometimes we have done it. There have been cases where we've done it. So there's a social listening function that's out there monitoring a lot of the conversations about our brand, genetically modified foods, herbicide use, those types of things. We also have a content development team in-house here, and we also work with an agency. But in-house, we have a writer and a content strategist on staff who is actively looking for those stories from employees that are kind of interesting. So, one of the great stories that I think we came up with was, about carrots. There was a couple stories a long time ago that baby carrots, a lot of people might assume that baby carrots are grown that way. Well, no, they're just kind of misshapen carrots that a farmer came up with in 1986 as a way to stop food waste, right?
Oh,
so
really?
We saw this,
I didn't know that.
So we saw this article out there from like 10 plus years ago, and we thought, well, that's an interesting way to repurpose it. And oh, by the way, we're in the carrot business. So Let's talk to one of our carrot breeders to get their perspective on this idea of what, carrot breeding like in baby carrots. And so there's a way of combining the social listening with the content development, right? There's an interesting story out there from a little while ago about about baby carrots. And oh, by the way, we're in the carrot business. Let's find a way to write content about that. And it's a very good story for us. Then
when you write that content, Nick, how do you publish it? Is it on your blog? Is it papers that you publish that are standalone, or all the above?
Yeah, it's mostly the blog is our traditional platform for us. So we have a discover.monsanto.com that was really focused. We established a website that was really focused on telling our story to a consumer audience. And so this discover.monsanto.com has those types of stories on that website.
Okay.
Here's the history of baby carrots. I bet you didn't know that.
Right.
Our other blogs that have been a little longer term, they started back in 2009 or so, I think. Those tend to be a little bit more company focused. Hey, there's a media statement that we need to put out about this particular issue that popped up, or here's an award we won for best diversity workplace or something like that. There's a blog that's sort of more company centric, and then there's a blog that's really like consumer centric of like, hey, here's some aha type things about food and how it's grown. With a little bit of a Monsanto bent. So, the strategy for some of us on some of these blog posts that we write it's not about us, it's about the reader. I mean, that's some of that's writing 101 or brand journalism 101. But for a company like us, we were so excited like 10 years ago to be like, hey, genetically modified foods are okay. You should hear why. Well, now let's walk that back and kind of flip the script a little bit to say, here's some challenges that are going on in the food system and farmer space, and then kind of end up with like, oh, and by the way, Monsanto is in the business of selling genetically modified seeds to farmers, and this is why it's a benefit.
Right.
So you kind of flip the script a little bit into how you tell that story. Okay.
And Nick, you said earlier that you actually look for stories from employees. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So, we have an internal communications team here at Monsanto that I think is a staff of 4 or 5 folks who are actively, receiving stories and finding stories within our community of 20,000 employees. So we're a global company. I think half of our employees in the United States and half are ex-US. So, a lot of the stories that appear on our what we call our connection website is our internal intranet, is our intranet site. There are a lot of stories about employees winning awards or teams that are doing innovative things in spaces. And so we're constantly meeting with that team every day, and I can go into the newsroom here in a minute that helps mine some of these stories. But, not every story that ends up on connection is good for external use. But there are those times you're like, wait, this is a good external story. Let's share that. Let's repurpose it for an external audience. So, I can't get into too many specifics off the top of the head there, Bernie, but sure. It's just another connection point of like, hey, this is a really cool story, and it deserves amplification outside of these 4 walls at Monsanto. Let's find a way to get it onto a blog post or maybe do a media pitch on it. So we're really connected in those avenues to try to tell those employee stories better.
Okay. All right, Nick, you've made reference to your newsroom. Can you explain what is your newsroom and what role does it play?
Yeah, so we had this, when we kind of reset our communications and social media team about 2 years ago, one of the things our leadership was asking us to do on a daily basis was share more stories, get out there more often, amplify our stories. And one of the hiccups to some of this was in the morning I'd get into the office and I'd get a link from my colleague that says, hey, this is a great story about us. You should share this on Twitter and Facebook. And it'd be like, okay, that's great. We'll plan on doing that today. Well, then 2 hours later, somebody else from a different team would say, hey, did you see this story? Can you make sure this gets out? And we'd have to write back and say, yes, we already did that. And then another hour later, all of our bosses would reply and say, hey, did you see this story? Make sure this gets out. And we're like, already done it. Check the box. Well, by the end of the day, sometimes you'd have 7 or 8 emails saying, did you share this story? And it'll be the same damn story, Bernie. It was becoming a little bit of a barrier to getting some work done occasionally. So we kind of all sat around one day and was like, there's got to be a better way to share this information and not have all these emails come flying through and phone calls on every hour on the hour, it seemed. So we said, why don't we meet every morning to discuss the news of the day that we're going to share on Twitter and Facebook and the blog and just regroup. And so we kind of set this, what we call our digital newsroom, every day at 9:30. We meet in our social media team space, and we have representation from our internal communications team, the content development team, our brand team who's monitoring, the brand health and trying to articulate the ideals of the brand, what we call our crisis communications team, our issues management team. They're the ones who are bringing sort of the bad news bears, if you will. They need to be aware of what's going on. The social listening team, the agency resources are there. Some of our international colleagues have taken an interest in this too, because they're resource strapped and they want to hear what's going on and see if there's ways they can share some of our information. And even our HR group is involved in this. So we meet every day at 9:30 for a half hour. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it goes over. And we just kind of throw everything out there. What did you find overnight? What did you find this morning as you came in and were searching your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed? What are some of those interesting articles that Monsanto can either, one, share on our channels, or two, what are some of the ideas that we can pull and say, look, that's a great story that we can tell. And one of the great examples I think that came out of it was back in January, there was it was Dr. Scoville's birthday, and Google had a doodle on its website. So you open up Google and you got the Google Doodle, right? And I noticed that it had a pepper, and I was like, that's really weird. You never see ag-based stuff on the Google Doodle. So I clicked on it. I was like, oh, it's Scoville. And if you're not familiar with it, it's the pepper, the Scoville heat units. How hot is the pepper? So bell pepper has 0, no heat, all the way up to jalapeno and these ghost peppers that are super hot. And we brought that up in the newsroom. I was like, this is just interesting. We're in the pepper business. Let's think through if we can do something. Well, then someone on the team brought up and said, why don't we do a pepper taste testing video and show all of our reactions to the various hotness of peppers? So we shot that in a day, posted it on Facebook, and it did super well. And it got shared broadly outside of our traditional audiences. Farmers loved it. Employees really loved it. We had employees saying, hey, I didn't get the memo that I could be a taste tester. So we actually had all this wonderful goodwill just from this one idea that came out in the newsroom, and we shot it in a day. So it's a content development and sharing meeting that really just kind of sets the tone for the day. And we send out an email afterward, and we let all the bosses know and say, we've got it covered. We don't need you sending the emails throughout the day. So it's just a great touch point that kind of, sets us apart. I think it definitely is a different way of doing stuff. We've talked to a couple other brands at different conferences we've gone to, and they're like, wow, you guys meet every single day? And it's like, look, we have to, because if we don't, we're going to get that email 15 times a day saying, did you do this? So this sort of cuts it off, and it really helps us think through content.
All right, that's a great story. So now what I want to do is I want to tell a story that really summarizes what we discussed here today. And so I'm going to walk through my notes. Yeah, good luck, right. And then I'm going to ask you to just elaborate on anything that you feel needs to be elaborated on briefly, of course. And if I have any gaps or holes, fill them in. So we started the conversation, Nick, with just some background on Monsanto. Even though the company's been around since 1901, it's really about a 13-year-old company because it was really reinvented with a focus on agriculture when the agriculture unit was spun off around 2003. And so you realize that somewhere around 2008, 2009, that a lot of people were talking about their food, and there were 3 specific events that you mentioned, an article called The Harvest of Fear, a writer, Michael Pollan, who wrote a book that was very popularized on food, and even one or more articles in Food Inc. that featured Monsanto and looked at agriculture. And some of basically what you were reading was you didn't feel like it was representing your approach to agriculture accurately. So, and then on top of that, what kind of exacerbated the frustration is that the farmer community as a percentage of the U.S. population is very small, less than 2%, as you pointed out. So you started to see people on social media talking about these topics, but again, not in a way that really represented truthfully, the value and the approach to Monsanto as a brand. So in around 2009, you kicked off a program called America's Farmers, which is really an awareness campaign focused on the farmer, empowering them to really become the brand that they really deserve to be. And you talked about different approaches that you took and different elements of it, like the America's Farmers Rural Community, where they can nominate nonprofits to receive a check for $2,500. And really just focus on making them the hero. And there were a couple of different programs that you mentioned. And then you talked about how you really became very active on social sharing and social amplification. And you talked about how there's really 2 levels of customers, if you will. There's the people you sell to, which are the farmers. They're your actual customers. and how you really wanted to help them be branded as the original environmentalist. And you spoke to a specific example of an image that was shared. But then there's also the consumers, you and I, the people, maybe not you because you work for Monsanto, even though you eat like the rest of us, but the rest of us that don't work for Monsanto, and how, you wanted to answer questions that people have and kind of debunk misperceptions around modern agriculture. So you really focused on storytelling, and even storytelling around controversial topics like GMO, genetically modified organisms, and helping answer questions for consumers about what is it and what they should know about it and how farmers are employing sustainable practices. So you really implemented a pretty deliberate content strategy, beginning with social listening to monitor for conversations. And then you've got a team that's comprised of strategists, writers, and you're looking for stories from employees as well as looking for stories that are out there in the public domain. So you told a story about the baby carrots and how you said, hey, we're in the carrots business, and so you created content around that. And you mentioned discover.monsanto.com. We'll make sure we link that up in the show notes, where you're telling stories to the consumer audience. And you've also got some other blogs that are more about Monsanto, the corporation, and things that you're doing, and how your internal communications team is constantly looking for stories from your 20,000 employees. How they have access to internal resources where they can just kind of, give you some insights into, what potential stories. You meet with your team every day. This is really cool. And how on a daily basis you meet 9:30 a.m., and you're really driven by the fact that leadership wants to do more storytelling. So your daily meeting at 9:30 a.m. includes stakeholders from internal communications, brand crisis communications, social listening, your agency, international, human resources. And you talk about, what are the articles that you've come across overnight and this morning that can be shared or repurposed or engaged. And you even tell the story about the pepper taste testing video, based on, some of that story. So your internal digital newsroom is all about really the storytelling that is going to support the true brand story at Monsanto. So that's my summary, Nick. I'm sticking with it, but I want to give you the opportunity to elaborate or fill in any holes.
The only, and then the last thing that I thought, when you were talking about employees, I can tell this real quickly. Another way we help employees sort of share our story going forward is built off the newsroom. Is we have an internal tool that we call the Advocacy. I know it's a play on words, but basically it's a social sharing site.
Say it again, please.
It's AGVOCATE, Advocate. So it plays off Advocate. It's an internal site that we use here that really takes the stories we share in the newsroom and lets employees who are active on social media in turn share them with their audiences. So if we have company-related news or there's an issue about GMOs that we want employees to be aware of that are active on social media, we'll post it to the Advocate. And it's sort of like you log in every morning, you say, I want to share this on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and it kicks out sort of a message. So it makes it a little bit easier for employees to share those company stories. They're the ones who aren't involved in communications. They're the ones who are working as an agronomist in the field in central Illinois who they don't have the luxury of searching Google every day or being on Twitter all the time.
Right.
So when they get back to the office, they can hop onto this tool and say, oh, that's a pretty interesting article about our CEO. I want to share that to my followers.
Right.
So it's just another extension of the sort of content strategy. I just flag it out there as another thing that's sort of a little bit interesting for us from a big brand perspective is how do you empower employees to share your story forward more?
Right. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Well, Nick, where would you like to send people to learn more about Monsanto or connect with you online?
Sure. So I think the best place to learn a little bit more about the business and what we're trying to reach consumers would be discover.monsanto.com. And there's a cool feature on there, a conversation where we have taken over 700 plus questions from consumers about a lot of our business practices and food and agriculture, and tried to answer them in a conversational way with consumers. And you can learn a little bit more about how we're trying to tell stories differently there. Personally, I'm on Twitter on N_web. It's N_WEB. That's Twitter, where I'll share a lot of stuff about Monsanto, of course, but also sports and food and agriculture and all that good stuff. So
okay, outstanding. Well, Nick, thank you so much for sharing your social business insights from what you're doing at Monsanto. Really appreciate your time and those insights.
Well, thanks, Bernie. I appreciate the time. It was a very good conversation.
Terrific. Well, I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Nick Weber, Global Social Media Strategy Lead at Monsanto Company. This episode is sponsored by Outward Media, Inc., a leader in the direct marketing industry. Download OMI's ebook, The Executive's 15-Minute Guide to Building a Successful Email Marketing Database, to discover the essentials, and I mean the essentials, for improving email deliverability. You can get your copy now at outwardmedia.com/SBE. And you'll also find this link on the show notes page for this episode at our website at socialbusinessengine.com. Before I close out this episode, I want to invite you to become a member of our Social Business Engine community. Membership is totally free and it provides premium content that we only make available to our members. Our community is made up of thousands of business professionals whose common interest is using social media strategy, social technology, and social culture to create better business results and to improve their career. It's easy to become a member, and remember, it's free. Just visit our website at socialbusinessengine.com. Well, that is going to do it for episode 116. I want to thank my guest once again, Nick Weber, Global Social Media Strategy Lead at Monsanto Company. This is Bernie Borges of Find and Convert, wishing you continued success on your social business journey.